Before I introduce our last speaker, I have to also let you know that I went online to Congressman Valladio's website and I filled out a please come to our event form. I heard nothing. I couldn't find the same form on Congressman Fong's website, so I mailed him an invitation, handwritten, with my phone number, and I heard nothing. So I wanted you to know that. I just wanted you to know that. And now our last speaker, Dr. Randy Villegas, professor of political science at College of Sequoias and a trustee for the Visalia Unified School Board of Education. Randy is a product of public education, attending a community college, CSU, and UC, while pursuing higher education. Before beginning graduate school, Randy worked as a journalist and a community organizer in Bakersfield, California. He's been a recipient of numerous awards and currently featured in the California State Capitol Museum in their Unity exhibit for his work around social justice issues in the Central Valley. After being appointed to the Visalia School Board in December of 2021, he was elected by the voters of Area 6 to continue serving in November of 2022 and re-elected in 2024. Randy is honored to serve our students, families, and Central Valley. Welcome, Randy.
Thank you. I hope you don't mind if I stand and sit here for a bit. My name is Randy Villegas. As mentioned, I'm a professor, a school board trustee, and as a few weeks ago, a candidate for Congress. But before I was any of those, thank you, the 22nd Congressional District. But before I was any of those things, I was a child growing up here in the Central Valley, just down the road in Bakersfield. A child that was hungry and at times was wondering where his next meal was going to come from. Like many parents, my family worked jobs that paid too damn little to afford the bills, to afford the rent, to afford the mortgage. And so at times I was wondering when I was going to eat. And it's because of that my mother was one of the 40,000 plus women in the 22nd Congressional District that needed WIC to make sure that she had baby formula for myself and for my siblings. My parents relied on these programs. I relied on Medicaid in order to get health care coverage. And now all of those programs are under attack because of elected officials like Valadeo, like Fong, who don't have the spine to stand up to their political party, to stand up to their president, and to fight for working families here in the Central Valley. As a child, I grew up and I learned to love school, both because I was really hungry for knowledge and also because I was hungry for food. And it was because free breakfast and lunch programs that I was able to focus on my classes, on studying, on my quizzes, as opposed to my stomach grumbling in class. And just a couple months ago, Republicans announced a plan to cut $12 million from school meal funding over the next few years. Can you believe that? That they would want to take food out of the mouths of hungry children across the Central Valley. And just like many of my colleagues have spoken about, we know that the Central Valley feeds the world, and yet many of our workers are struggling to feed their own families. That's called a contradiction, and we need to do something about that. And why are our representatives silent? At this point, all of you sitting here in this room and everybody here on this stage has attended more public town halls than Valadeo has in the last decade. Why is that? We deserve better, and we don't only deserve better, we demand better here in the Central Valley. Our workers, our families work too damn hard to not have elected officials show up and do their jobs, right? This most recent budget proposal, which Valadeo and Fong both voted to move forward, has major cuts to our communities. $880 billion that they want to cut from Medicaid. They want to make cuts to SNAP, to WIC, to all these programs that our working families rely on. Why? Because they want to give the richest Americans in the country, our top 1%, $1.1 trillion in tax cuts. That, to me, is not a budget that prioritizes our valley's values. That, to me, is not a budget that prioritizes our working families. Elon Musk doesn't need more money to go buy a yacht or a private island or whatever it is that billionaires buy, but our working families need these programs in order to survive. We know that if Musk gets sick, if Jeff Bezos gets sick, they're able to afford their health care. But these are individuals that don't care what happens to us if one of our family members gets sick and can't afford to pay the bills. We deserve a healthcare system that works for everyone. And this district, the 22nd district, actually has more Medicaid recipients than any other district across the country. 2 out of every 3 people rely on Medicaid in this district. And we can look no further than this room. I want you to raise your hand if you or someone you love relies on Medicaid in order to get the healthcare coverage that they need. Take a look around. Okay? Now, everyone put your hands down. I want you to raise your hand if you or someone you love has had to choose not to go to the doctor because they were afraid that they couldn't afford the bills. Raise your hand. Look around you. This should not be happening in the richest country in the history of the world. And I don't know how some of these politicians like Valadeo, like to talk about calling themselves pro-life. Because we know under this healthcare system, over 60,000 people die every single year because they don't have health insurance in this country. Over 60,000. Not because we couldn't treat them, not because we couldn't save them, but they die because they didn't have health insurance. And yet they call themselves quote-unquote pro-life. We know that's not the case. We know they just want to control women's bodies. We know they want to control working families. And we know that we deserve better here in the Central Valley. And I want to share a little bit more about my story. Growing up, I found a passion for education. I thankfully got a full-ride fellowship to UC Santa Cruz to get my PhD, but my heart always belonged back here in the Valley. So I knew I wanted to come back as soon as possible. Thankfully, I got that opportunity at College of the Sequoias. I've been teaching there for the last 5 years, just across the street at the COS Hanford Center and the COS Tulare Center. So I'm very proud to serve our students and families here. And I had the opportunity to then be appointed and elected to the Visalia Unified School Board of Trustees, where I've carried my experiences with me as a student. As Lori will tell you, when I was in high school, our school district, the current high school district, was actually sued for disproportionately suspending and expelling youth. We had 7 times the national suspension and expulsion rate. I had friends who were getting expelled for chewing gum and not spitting it out, for wearing a hat in class. Several of you are wearing hats, and you can still pay attention to what's going on. It's magnificent, right? And yet, it was those kinds of zero-tolerance policies that affected me in high school and then growing up. And now as a school board trustee, I carried all of those lessons with me. So I want to tell you a brief story here. There was a student at one of our elementary schools, at Riverway Elementary, who unfortunately was engaging in some vandalism in the bathrooms. And I remember talking to our superintendent, talking to administration at that school site about what we could do in this situation. And we could have taken a couple different options. We could have gone the current high school district route and suspended or expelled this student, which to me was just, I can't even think about that. How are you going to expel an elementary school student? Why are you going to make a student fall even further behind in their lessons? And so we did something a little bit different, something that required reflection, something that required us to ask tough questions as a school district. Like, what kinds of opportunities were we allowing this youth to express themselves? How were we actually investing in this youth? So we did meet with them, we talked to them about the consequences of their actions and why we can't engage in vandalism, but then we did something a little bit different. Using school funds, we actually hired and contracted a professional graffiti artist to start a graffiti art club at that elementary school, to which that student joined and so many other students joined immediately. And I'm very proud to tell you that for the rest of that school year, 0 incidents of vandalism at that elementary school. So what does that show us as a community, as a society? It shows us that when we invest in our youth, when we empower our youth, we can truly transform and change outcomes in society. And that's what we need to do. And I know Carla had talked about some of the cuts, potential cuts that are coming up, but these cuts are already happening. The Fresno Bee just published an article earlier this week about how DOGE has cut several grants across Kings County, Tulare County. Visalia Unified, we lost a multi-million-dollar grant that was supposed to help us recruit teachers to the district. And so these cuts are already happening. Fresno Unified losing, I think, over $400,000 for a program that they were going to start to help individuals get citizenship in their community. And so these cuts are already happening. And our representatives don't have the spine to stand up to a political party or to a president. And I'm here to say that we deserve better in all of these regards, whether it's education, whether it's healthcare, whether it's an economy that works for everyone. And it's no wonder why they're not speaking out. You might say, why isn't Valadeo talking about Elon Musk and DOGE cutting all these funds from our community? Well, I'll tell you exactly why. because it's exactly who he's working for. Elon Musk spent about $1 million this last election cycle through his super PAC to help David Valadao get elected. So is it any wonder why he doesn't have the spine to stand up to this billionaire or to any billionaires? Because he's not working on behalf of working families, he's working on behalf of his corporate sponsors. And that's why we need elected officials who are going to work for us, who are going to work on behalf of our communities. For far too long, the Central Valley's been left behind by politicians who are more in love with power than they are with people. By elected officials who are more interested in serving multinational corporations than our own communities. And as I look around this room and I see all of you participating in this town hall, this is what democracy looks like. This is what our communities look like. And this is what we need to expand all across Kern, Tulare, Kings, and the Valley. And I'm reminded as at times we may feel tempted to sit in despair, to give up because everything is overwhelming, especially at the federal government level. I remind us that we can't give up. And as I look around this room, I know that we won't give up. Because, there's a saying around circles that it takes a village to make something happen. But as I look around this room and I see all of you, I know that it takes a valley. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Randy. Help me with these questions, or would you? We can. Let's see. We are going to now, a lot of you submitted questions ahead of time, and so we're going to be reading those questions and see which panelist feels most comfortable, or maybe we can even direct them to there. Oh, you did this? Okay, look at that. Okay, if you have questions, because we've had, some really, really good information, Norberto back there has forms. And, you can fill that out and we'll see if we have time. Okay, first of all, here is a question for all of you. Want to start with this one? Yeah. How can we get unfit leaders out of office? What if you guys ask that question?
I'll start this one. Really easy. Vote, right? Absolutely. And I will say, not just on election day, but vote every day. What do I mean by that? The decisions that we make on a daily basis about what companies we support, where we donate to political campaigns, all of that leading up to elections can affect who gets elected and who doesn't get elected, right? And it's the reality of money in politics and big money in politics, right? That's one of the reasons I've chosen to run a corporate-free campaign. I'm not receiving a single dollar from corporate PACs because I want people to know that when we get to Congress, we're working on behalf of working families, not on behalf of Elon Musk or not on behalf of corporations. So I think it's really important, between election day, volunteer, get involved, educate folks, but vote every single day in the decisions you make, in the companies you choose to support, in the candidates you choose to support. I think that's really important.
So here it is, Let me take Kern County. It's a District 4, a Moldoff lawsuit. So the County Board of Supervisors chooses their own districts. You know this, right? So in Fresno County, even though the Latino and Anglo communities have reversed in the last 30 years the numbers, those lines are still static. And in Kern County, there was a lawsuit that said, there's racism happening in your redistricting, and you need to change this. The court mandated it, and now that district has Arvin, this is Delano, Weed Patch, and it has a sliver of a neighborhood in Bakersfield that is elite. Even after the redistricting that was equity-based, that district has not turned, because that one district is voting at such a high percentage. They hire consultants to do an analysis and they know voter turnout. So we need to exercise the most basic and fundamental right is to vote. And we need to assist working class folks, some of them newly arrived in our country. We need to address the cynicism in our country to get people to vote. In the urban context of Fresno, we have maps of voter turnout. And it's an intensely urban area that has much longer history of progressive organizing there than you would think. And we have, basically we have good elected officials at the city council level there. But the turnout between the north of the town, which is the wealthy part, and the south of the town is dramatic. It's just that the poor folks so overwhelmingly outnumber. It's like 20-30% turnout in the south of the city and 90% of the north. So the people why did we fight for civil rights? People suffered and were killed here 40, 30 years ago. And the intensity of the racism that's happened in the Valley is almost as extreme as what happened in the American South. So we need to help folks to vote. Finally, very simply, we are now running good candidates, huh? I mean...
So I'm an active member with the Kings County Democrats, and around elections, it's not scary to go knock on doors and talk to candidates. We have postcard pizza parties on Mondays. We are out there. I'm the one leading all the protests, the 50-51 protests. So we did April 5th, we did June 19th, we did April 5th, April 19th. We did May Day, and our next one is June 14th. I have people in here who've never protested before. We're not in other people's faces. We're out there for visibility. And Kings County needs to vote. If you ever look, we get some elections, 15% of the total electorate vote. Talk to your neighbors about voting. Assist an elderly person to the polls. Assist an elderly person to fill out their ballot. Young people don't understand the ballot. We're working with the registrar to get nonpartisan people into the high schools to help kids register to vote. They can pre-register at 16 now in the state of California, but they don't know what to do with the ballots. I think the propositions really confuse them. So if you know young people in your life, offer to help them to let them make the decision, but they need help looking at their ballots. It's simple things you can do to help candidates you believe in. And the Kings County Democrats, we are here to help educate everybody, but we do see a lot of cynicism. At the Thursday night marketplace, are you registered to vote? Oh, I don't vote. Would you like to talk about that? No, everybody's crooked. That is the cynicism Dan's talking about. But just little conversations, and if people, you don't have to talk your politics with people, but you can talk about voting. Just participate.
So many things came to mind for me. Such a nice, soft, easy question to start with, Kathy. Thank you so much. Whatever popped into your mind the minute she asked that question, that is what we should be doing, right? Because each and every one of us has the ability to do the things that Dan, Randy, and Carla just said. There's a short-term answer to the question, and there's a long-term answer to the question. I have spent most of my career on the long-term and the short-term, so if you want to get in the weeds on this, I'm your girl. Sign your name up on my thing back there, and right next to it, I want to talk about voting too, and I will call you and we will have coffee, and you'll probably be thoroughly not interested in doing that with me ever again. But the short-term, simple things that I think are useful to share with you right now. Number one, we have many unfit leaders right now, especially. How do we get rid of them? Well, I learned that amongst the folks that study authoritarian regimes, no authoritarian regime has survived has survived in an environment where 10% or more of the populace come out in a sustainable protest way. Our protests currently nationwide have hit about 3.5 million. So we got about 6.5 more to go, right? So I would say getting out there with Carla is probably a critical piece, and bringing some folks with you. I got a minivan, you can hop in, it fits 8, right? Then the second piece that we can do right now, tell everyone you know that Prop 17 made it possible for people on probation and parole to register to vote and vote. And that includes people who are in our county jail facilities who are only waiting for trial or have only been convicted of misdemeanors. It's only people who are in state or federal prisons serving time on felonies that cannot vote in the state of California. Everybody else can vote. So, and there's a fun little thing you can go online to the Secretary of State's website. If you really don't know if this applies to your loved one or to yourself, it'll ask you a series of questions at the end of which it'll say if you're eligible or not. So if you're on probation or parole, you're outside in the community, you can vote. Please tell everybody, because that's a critical piece.
Okay, I've got a question here for Lori and Dan, okay? How can we begin to work together to promote sustainable food chain, meaning that we grow crops that promote sustainability, encourage sustainable agricultural practices, and promote a sustainable way of buying, cooking, and eating food?
Oh wow, it's like slow pitch softball. And I strike out a lot in that too. Wow, it is a beautiful question. First of all, Lori mentioned about renewable energy. We want producers rather than consumers. And there's 2 ways that you can produce energy. You can put solar on your house. Food, you can grow it in your backyard. Notice they're both measured in calories. And sometimes food is grown for energy. So we have food movements globally. I will just reference agroecology, a much more integrated system, both ecologically, economically, politically. 2 pieces to this. First, notice how easily in the San Joaquin Valley, we drove through Fowler here. I spent years trying to fight sprawl. Farmers, notice how easy it is for agribusinesses to sell their farmland into sprawl. And that's not coming back, right? And the cities and towns in the valley were put on top of the best water, the best soil, so it's the best farming was where the people, and those have grown out. I grew up I was born in 67 in Inglewood, California. In 1916, Inglewood and Watts were tiny little farm towns like we see here. I grew up in Orange County and Irvine. My entire town was destroyed in my lifetime. This will happen and can happen here. It's the commodification of land just for sheer speculation. Conservation, straight up, partnering with landowners and farmers. And if you begin to vision what that looks like in an era of climate change, to conserve the area around our residences, to produce food, there's economics that follow that. First of all, those are small and medium-sized farming usually. You could do cooperatives, but you could vertically integrate along the value chain. You can produce the food in an equitable way and sell it into the city. You could do value added. You can produce kimchi. You can produce salsas. Why are we buying salsa? When we can grow it here, we have the cultural knowledge to make the best salsas ever. And you can do many small businesses. Where Donna and I live, we go to McKinley and First, and there's 3 pho restaurants right there, right? So there's restaurants, there's cooperative, perfect scale of a cooperative is a market. And up in wealthy areas, in the Bay Area, they have food co-ops. So we have a means of both production, of land conservation, of agroecological stewardship and care. You can do science on land, right? Everything from producing the food to selling it to the science of the interaction between soil, light, and so everything kind of comes together. Our solutions are sitting right in front of us, as are our economics. The combination of equity and conservation should equate into a vertical integration along the value chain, not solely to extract profit, but for community well-being and care, nutrition, tied with jobs, tied with healthcare. So this is here for us. And finally, many of our farm workers were actually farmers. NAFTA drove the small-scale farmers out of Oaxaca, and the Hmong, the Armenians, the Mennonites. These are folks that either from a religious background or specifically a cultural background had to immigrate here, and they have deep cultural knowledge. There's Hmong farmers that have to go to farmers market in LA to sell their what is the name of that grass? We have such an opportunity to live well in both economic terms, cultural enrichment, and food and production. And food is a nexus point that combines everything. Everything. These food centers, Napa, or people travel to go to the south of France, the Provence. Why is it the San Joaquin Valley ground zero for food culture? It is, but we need to invigorate it more, right?
Dan is definitely the expert on this particular question, and I definitely defer to his comments. The only thing I would add is that I think that, first of all, there are farm workers who are starting to build their own co-ops, and I think that if you are lucky enough to encounter some of those folks doing that, definitely see how you can support them, because to Dan's point, they are profoundly knowledgeable about how to grow food locally and how not to waste the stuff that we are already throwing away. I'll give you a quick example. I was teaching a climate literacy class, and Líderes Campesinas was participating in it. And we started talking about real climate solutions with regard to food. And they told me about this plant that grows in the wild in the western part of Kern County, and that most of the folks out there will just kill it with Roundup or something, or try to plow it under, but it's actually edible. People can, include it as a part of their diet. It's a pretty substantive vegetable, but it's being viewed as having no value. So I think a critical answer to this question is learning how to flip the script in our minds and hearts about what is food, where it should come from, and who is producing it. And then the second piece is we have to really keep in mind as well to think three-dimensionally about this. Our region is projected, given current climate, unfortunate realities. There's a great book called On the Move by Brad Lustgarten. I listened to it on Audible while weeding in my garden in the backyard over the course of a weekend. So anybody can just pick this up and listen to it for a couple days. It taught me why my insurance was canceled. My home insurance was canceled, y'all. It's not because I didn't pay the bill. It's because of wildfires and other climate disasters making it too expensive to provide the insurance, and the company was pulling out of our market in Bakersfield. Well, why is that? And what does that have to do with food? Well, it's because, and this book talks about it, we are projected to have extreme drought and the inability to use our land to grow food here in the Central Valley, and folks are going to have to migrate. We are projected by the year 2050 to have 2 billion people migrate because of climate change worldwide. We have to think about not just how to combat this problem now, and we're going to have to give up some of the short-term comforts that we want, because we're also projected here in the Central Valley to have our population increase by 6 million in the next 30 to 50 years. Because people are getting driven out of Central America by drought, getting driven out of Mexico, getting driven out of other parts of our world, and that is why a lot of the migration is happening. So we really have to educate ourselves about the seriousness of the impacts on us now. We're not even really, a lot of people don't realize these things. They're walking around, they don't realize that this is what's happening. Folks are going to have to migrate, and it is impacting our food sources. We have to think about that.
Okay, I've got something for Randy here. I've got a lot of them actually that look like they're good for Randy. Recognizing the diverse political perspectives within our community, how can we create more opportunities for constructive dialogue and collaboration on critical issues like water, labor, and find solutions that benefit everyone?
Absolutely, it's a great question. And I think it starts with having open and honest and civil conversations with one another. In spaces like this, in spaces like your kitchen tables, in spaces in the public parks. I think over the last couple of decades, unfortunately, a lot of people like to isolate themselves. And I even tell my students about this, don't fall into echo chambers. It's very easy to unfriend someone or unlike someone or unfollow someone on social media because you don't like an opinion that they posted. And oftentimes people create these echo chambers for themselves where they're only reaffirming their own views. And I think it's okay, it's healthy to challenge your own views, and I encourage you to challenge your own views. And that happens with open and honest conversations with one another. And I think beyond that, we need to make sure that we're not writing people off, right? I know especially after this last election season, a lot of people may have been tempted to say, oh, this person voted this way, they're not invited to Thanksgiving, or I'm not gonna talk to them at Christmas, right? And I understand there's tension because people have beliefs, people have values. And I would never tell anybody to, try to be someone's friend who is dismissing their entire identity or way of being. But I think there's a way to have conversations around the issues that unite us as opposed to the issues that divide us. Billionaires, elites want us to focus on those very niche political issues that aren't really affecting our day-to-day, right? They want us to focus on these very niche culture wars as opposed to the class war that we've seen going on and people being exploited. And so more than anything, I think we need to keep our eyes together on the issues that unite us as opposed to the issues that divide us. Healthcare, I think, is an extremely good example here. When we look at the cost of drugs and prescription drugs and insulin in this country, especially if you don't have insurance, these costs can be astronomical. But if you drive across the border to Canada and you stop at the very first pharmacy that you see, you buy that same vial of insulin, the maximum cost that can be is $35. Why? Because that country has negotiated with pharmaceutical companies to have a cap on that prescription drug. Why don't we have that here in the United States? When we look at healthcare, valley fever, diabetes, cancer, doesn't care who you voted for in the last 2024 election. It doesn't care what your voter registration is. But all of us are going to need healthcare at one point or another. And that's why we need to fight for a system. Why is it that 2 out of every 3 bankruptcies here in the United States are tied to medical debt? That doesn't happen in other countries across the world, and it shouldn't be happening here. More than 60,000 people dying every year. That should not be happening here in the United States. And I think as we look to those issues and we have those conversations with one another to say, yeah, I think our tax dollars should be, helping out our fellow community members and neighbors and not spending on endless war. Yeah, I believe that we should be helping fund the future of our nation and our education and our kids, as opposed to making sure that billionaires get more tax cuts. I think as we look to those issues that unite us as a people, as opposed to the culture wars that may divide us, we can find common ground. It is okay to compromise without compromising your values, and that's what I would leave you with.
Yeah. So many questions here. I don't know which one to go to next, but I think I really like this one. So, Lori, in Mr. Valadeo's telephone conference, he mentioned using federal lands so California can produce our own gas to lower gas prices. My concern with that is the safety of our national parks. Do you have any idea as to how we can protect them while also lowering fuel prices?
This is a very, very active conversation within Sierra Club National right now. And in fact, there are many spaces and groups that I would invite whoever asked this question and anybody else who cares about it to see me about. Because there are bills that are going through a process in Congress right now that are basically addressing this exact issue. And if we're not impacting that decision making and we're not paying attention to it, then we could potentially lose up to 21 million acres of forest lands here in the Sierra Nevadas. An executive order was issued by the Trump administration, maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago now, to basically target the entire state of California's forests for logging in the name of wildfire prevention. Now, yeah, I know, like, let that sink in, right? Our chapter in particular has been working with folks with deep expertise in this area, and it is a complicated, issue to wade in on, but we know that that's not why that bill is going through Congress right now. That bill is going through Congress because of these kinds of fast, easy talking points that politicians can use about the cost of gas and the cost of goods that people use every day. The fact of the matter is that we need to get those pieces of glass and we need to point them at the sun. Right? It's actually very simple. Those are actually pretty cheap. And there's a ton of stuff in the Inflation Reduction Act that helps people get those pieces of glass and point them at the sun. The state of California has been producing so much solar energy, especially in the summertime, they've actually had to curtail it. They've had to dump it in the ground during the sunniest parts of the day in the summertime because there was nowhere on the grid to send it. So we also need to have batteries, which the Inflation Reduction Act also tackles. That is going to make the cost of gas irrelevant. Irrelevant. We know what the solutions are. They just don't want us to focus on how simple those solutions are because it's a lot easier to make people afraid that they're not going to be able to afford their vehicles, right? And I'll be honest. Let's acknowledge reality right here, right now. How many of you have an electric vehicle and you drove it here today? Not nearly enough hands. And why is that? Because we don't know how to make electric vehicles? Because we don't know how to make them cheaply? No. It's because the existing economic system, people make way too much money with the system as it is. This is why we call it transition. Growth and transitions are very challenging. But when we have a system that's metastasized by huge amounts of corporate money, and let's be very clear, the public relations industry wouldn't even exist if it weren't for big tobacco and big oil. Okay? There's a great investigative journalist named Amy Westervelt, and I encourage you all to look her up and her podcast, Drilled, because she does the deep dive into how the oil industry has completely used the PR system, birthed it practically to sanitize the reputation of Rockefeller, and weaponized the legal system, weaponized philanthropy, weaponized academic institutions to basically say, we can't have nice things or a nice planet, and here's why. So please be afraid of pointing that glass at the sun and producing your own energy. We have to wake up and get over that and realize just how much we're being gaslit in this country. Pun intended.
Okay, I've got one for Dan and Randy. Given the significant role undocumented immigrant workers play in our county's agricultural sector, and the fear and uncertainty created by stricter immigration policies, what specific steps can we as individuals and our counties take to support and protect these essential workers, ensuring they feel safe and valued within our communities?
Absolutely. This question hits home as the son of immigrants, and growing up for a very long time, fearing that my parents could be ripped apart from me at any moment. And I know that's the same fear that a lot of our children have been facing, given recent immigration raids throughout the valley. And so more than anything, what we can do right now is to advocate for safe, humane, and comprehensive immigration reform for our communities, to make sure that families are kept together. Beyond that, I know that we don't only have to look to the federal government, and we've seen how our federal government has failed time and time again to pass immigration reform. It hasn't happened since the 80s in this country. Right now, there's a lot of DACA recipients who fear that they're in legal limbo depending on what the Supreme Court's going to do. And so more than anything, what we need to do is support our local immigration advocacy organizations. Here in the Central Valley, we have organizations like CHIRLA, the Coalition for Humane and Immigrants' Rights, We have organizations that are on the ground helping individuals. Valley Voices, I know, has been providing a lot of information to folks about their rights. And I think it's very important as individuals, as neighbors, as educators, as school districts, that we are informing our students, our families about their rights. We just saw a lawsuit that was recently settled by the UFW because Border Patrol was racially discriminating and profiling people as they were on their way to work. And so more than anything, we need to know that these rights are provided regardless of citizenship status. You have the right to refuse any unwanted searches and seizures. You have the right to remain silent. You have the right to not self-incriminate against yourself. And people should not have to fear going to work, going to the grocery store, or just going about their day-to-day lives as they exist here in the community. And we know that not only do undocumented immigrants play a crucial role in our agricultural industry, but also in construction, but also in professional organizations. We have individuals who have had DACA for over 10 years. And so we need to make sure that we're advocating for comprehensive immigration reform. At the local level, I would encourage you to ask your school districts whether or not they have policies that protect the information of students and whether or not they have protocols as to what happens if an ICE agent shows up to a school district, as they showed up in LA. That superintendent showed up, stood their ground, and said he is not going to be allowed on campus, that ICE is not going to be allowed on campus. And so we need to demand that kind of leadership here in the Central Valley. We need to demand that kind of leadership from our school districts, from our superintendents, to let them know, because not only is it a question of doing the right thing and the humane thing, but every school district is funded on ADA, average daily attendance. That means when students are not in school, schools lose funding and school districts lose funding. And so it's for one thing for school districts to benefit from having undocumented students in their classroom and receive funding for it, and then not being willing to stand up for them. I think we deserve better than that. I think we need to demand that leadership from our school districts. So those are a few things that we can do.
Right.
So Don and I live in the inner city of Fresno. You sometimes see these movies, The Godfather or whatever. My father was from the Bronx. You wonder what the Lower East Side of New York was 200 years ago. Just like, whoa. The incredible, it's the vibrant beauty. We live that here. You go to I remember transitioning through the bus depot in San Jose about 10 years ago, and I can't believe the number of languages. Fresno Unified has 70 languages. So first of all, we're just so blessed. I come from an Irish background, and I don't forget my history, right? Irish need not apply, etc., the famine, the reception that my great folks arrived here with. And I make an appeal to white folks, because all of these Europeans, people of European descent, were immigrants, and many of them arrived without documents. I try to communicate to the Anglo community. I welcome immigrants exactly the same as I would have wanted somebody to welcome my great-great-grandmother. The exact same. I'm that ferocious as well. A few other points. Along with that, it's time to cash in your privilege. As an undergraduate, I did my senior thesis on the desaparecidos, the dirty war that happened from around 1977 in Argentina. We paid for these things. We paid for apartheid in South Africa. We supported all of these things. But in this context of the dirty war, it mirrors what you start seeing federal folks coming and taking people. And it's a precursor. If we know this lessons from Europe in the last century. First they came for the immigrants. They came for the labor organizers. But you're on that list. So even if I can't appeal to you as for empathy, I'm going to say, I don't like this word ally. My liberation is tied to my affinity and my solidarity with the oppressed. My liberation is linked to my solidarity with the oppressed. One final point. For the immigrant community, we have many that are in mixed status households. We need to begin especially these where maybe some of the older folks in the house might be undocumented, but the young folks were born here, and every year there's a march of them being able to vote. We need to vote in family groups. We need to vote with older folks, educating younger folks on why they actually immigrated to come here. In my master's thesis, the title is Aquí son los pobres, allá son los ricos. There was a young person that asked an immigrant mother and father in front of me, why were we rich in Mexico and poor here? And it embarrassed the parents. The parents who were middle class and actually great jobs in Mexico came here for the future of their kids, just as almost all of our ancestors did. So we need to communicate that story of sacrifice. Oh, the final thing, this guy, the first thing coming down the escalator, immigrants are rapists. We all know how absolutely false that is. No one works harder, sacrifices literally their health, they're in toxic environments, getting cancer, than immigrants. Immigrants are the lifeblood of our region, our state, our country.
Did you wanted to comment on this? No, you did? Okay. I didn't want her to feel left out. I wanted to add a little something to that. So, I promised the Rapid Response Network of Kern County that I would share a little bit more about the lawsuit and the decision that came down. I mean, I cannot even begin to tell you, and if you haven't read the CalMatters article about this outcome, please look it up. One of the primary reasons why this outcome was so great and why, the ACLU and the UFW Foundation were able to get pretty much everything that they asked for, which by the way wasn't like crazy reach for the stars stuff. It was like basic, like dignity related stuff, was because of the hard work of volunteers on the ground who documented, went out to where the CBP folks were basically harassing people getting their breakfast burritos and laying down spike strips behind their cars so they couldn't leave the convenience store where they got their breakfast burritos before heading out to the fields. This is the kind of stuff we're talking. They tried to nail them on the way to church. They purposely targeted people on the way to church, okay? CalMatters has very clearly blown the lid off of this. CBP and ICE had no prior knowledge of any criminal histories whatsoever. It was all BS. They were there to make a point. And the community rose up and said, not today. There were 15 people who put their lives, livelihoods, and family on the line to provide declarations for this lawsuit about what happened to them. The bravery that we have seen from people who, none of us are folks who are getting asked to give commentary on MSNBC or on CNN. We're not getting medals of freedom, but there are people living extraordinary bravery. The folks at DOJ who said, I'm not doing that. The folks in the federal agencies who are like, I'm not letting you take over this agency. The folks on the ground working within their networks to provide mutual support to one another. An attack on one is an attack on all. And to Dan's point, and where I really want to take this, I encourage every one of us to ask ourselves that conscious choice decision. Am I willing to risk my own comfort and benefit from the systems that maybe in the past I'm like, I'll tweet about, how messed up this is, but maybe I'm not going to put my own interests on the line. There was no Trump bump at most of the organizations, national and locally, that we saw in the first administration. There was no Trump bump in donations. There was no Trump bump in volunteers. Why? Because now it's real. Okay? They picked off those law firms, divided and conquered. They picked off those federal agencies, they divided and conquered. They picked off they tried to pick off higher education. But those folks know what this authoritarian process looks like, and they said the only way to protect ourselves is to stand with other people who are being attacked too. That is the only way to survive. Because eventually, if it's not happening to you now, if you weren't the one getting your breakfast burrito at the convenience store on your way out to work, it will be you tomorrow. I lived in East Germany, I studied this stuff. Most of us in this room have too. It's why we care so passionately about it. It's not just about our immigrants. It's not just about our trans people, which, by the way, is something that has not come up today. But I am on the board of the first ever Pride Chamber of Kern County, and I will tell you that it is about dignity and the ability to have a safe place that we're proud to call home. That's it. That's it. Is that really too much to ask?
We have so many more questions, but not enough time. But what our committee decided to do is we're going to answer these questions. I've got all the ones that were written out today, but I've got email addresses and things like that. We're going to get these to people, to part of the panel or the panel members, and we're going to have them answer them. We also have, we've got lots of questions that I haven't been able to ask today. We will try to get out as many answers as we can, and we hope that more and more people will get interested, get involved, and want to join us. We're going to give a wrap up now because we're trying to stay on time. So we're going to give each panel member 5 minutes to wrap up. And we're going to start with Dan. 5-minute wrap up, Dan. Dr. O'Connor.
So, in the book, I figured most people are only going to read the preface. They're in the back there. You can you can read the preface and just leave if you want. Knowing that, the attention span of people are limited now. Won't go there. The last line there is something that I wanted to hit people with. To be a scholar, you do not need a degree, by the way. Everyone critically, in fact, it's middle class and elite white people that have the most difficult time understanding theory, especially critical theory. Very easy for folks from, if you've been beaten up, to want to understand the mechanisms of how you're getting beaten up. And theory gives you that language. But I wanted to contextualize everything down, and it's important for this moment. The last line on the preface is, contests over truth are wars of attrition. Contests over truth are wars of attrition. And each of us is obligated to discern the integrity of our position in the world. I would argue that it's soul work. Gandhi talked about satyagraha, which roughly translates into truth force, but some people like Martin Luther King translate it into soul force. And so I'll go to the next step. I'm lucky. I'm credentialed as a scholar. I was raised Catholic. I love Anabaptists. I love the Gospels. I'm practicing Buddhist, but I am a member of the Religious Society of the Friends of the Truth, which is also known as Quakers. And in this midst of misinformation, so science will give you definitive answers. It will put you on the moon. Science could talk about the economic system that's in this book, talking about the economics of a society equate to its civic well-being and the political system that we're going to have. Truth. So, though, I want to move towards an article of faith. Truth. At a moment when we're all a little terrified, the rhetoric that's being used is dangerous. Truth, by definition, shows itself in the world. Truth, by definition, becomes the world. Because you just want to say climate change doesn't work, it doesn't exist, doesn't mean that it's not marching on us. That you want to listen to misinformation that cigarette smoking doesn't hurt you. You can keep smoking, on and on. We have to have a faith that we as individuals can discern this, and we as a society can discern it. And so let's march. The truth is that diversity, rather than monoculture, is the answer. That sharing, rather than greed, is the answer. Some of these are moral and value positions, but I think they can be empirically demonstrated as well. But there's just a moment here when we all have to worry about the amount of misinformation and lies. And then finally, a few other points. Why are poor people poor? I wanted to briefly just go back to answer that question. Agribusiness, and when I say that, it's monopoly scale, right? We brought water to the San Joaquin Valley. The level of greed was so extreme that not only did we import water to this place, they tapped the aquifer to the extent that the biggest lake west of the Mississippi disappeared. And in fact, it's the area with the most extreme aquifer depletion. That is 10,000 million-year-old water that's just gone and not coming back. This attack on... So these folks, I drove around during the last elections, farmers through Trump, and tariffs, by the way, we produce more food than we can consume. You just think to eat all the pistachios or almonds or beef or milk that we're producing here. The Midwest, soy and corn, we need to export that. And yet, so these tariffs are a the first Trump administration, the tariffs, we lost markets, mostly soy moving down to Argentina and Brazil. We lose markets. The attack on science, the industrialization of agriculture occurred to a great extent because of the research that was done at Berkeley and UC Davis and other land-grant schools. They were implicated in the problem. I hope they can participate in its solution. Farm labor. These agribusinesses just helped elect somebody who is going to attack the people they take advantage of that they need to produce food. And by the way, so if you start peeling this away, this crisis that will happen in agriculture because of the loss of markets and labor and science and capital to a certain extent, it will hurt the small farmers, it'll hurt the medium-sized farmers, it'll even hurt the big farmers, and it'll benefit the highly capitalized groups that can gobble up all those entities that are going to go bankrupt. Mark my words, they manufacture crises at times. This benefits only the very, very top. And I already told you the threat of monopoly. We want a diversified economy. The more equitable, the better the democracy. A plug. Land on the 22nd, I work closely with the labor unions. I have an environmental background though. The Fresno, Madera, Kings, Tulare, Central Labor Council, labor unions, by the way, they are one of the reasons why we had a middle class in the 50s, because of about 80 years of struggle to get the 8-hour workday and weekends off and get kids out of mines. Labor unions are super important in a capitalist economy. The Fresno, Madera, Kings, Tulare Central Labor Council is going to host an empowerment institute where I get to talk about land justice. And again, I told you about my history as an Irish person. So I'm going to talk a little bit about community land trusts. I'm going to talk about a history of conservation and how and why it's a necessity to integrate that with equity. And when I say equity, I always mean racial justice. And finally, community land trust, we have a lot to learn from our immigrant communities. Ejidos, the mechanism of getting land back to indigenous people after the Mexican Revolution. that was institutionalized at a federal government level in Mexico. We could learn from that. How are we going to share land and our labor and our beautiful cultures together? We're at the moment of radical sharing just as much as we're going to be in a defensive posture. I want to start progressively promoting, moving forward. I'm not just going to play defense now. We need to march towards that beautiful community that's waiting for us.
I'm just going to say, support all avenues of learning in our community, your public schools, your libraries, your museums. We do have museums in Kings County. We have the Art Museum, we have the Sarah Mooney Museum, we have the Carnegie Museum. Support your educators, your paraprofessionals, your bus drivers. If you have time to I'm getting ready to retire, so now the volunteer part of my life starts. And then if you want to get involved here in Kings County, you can go to the Kings County Democrats, but if you go to the 5051, that's where I post all our events. The next one is June 14th, Flag Day, when they plan to have that big military parade in DC. We will be out on Lacey and 12th on the corners with our signs, meeting new people. Visalia has lots of them too. Visalia, Porterville, they all have their own. You just have to go online and find one. I've met a lot of you at those. It's nice to be around people who want to talk and want to share. But support public education. Learn why charter schools are not always the best option. Learn about vouchers. Learn about different things. Cal Matters, she talked about Cal Matters. If you're not subscribing to the Cal Matters newsletter, powerful information. There's another free newspaper called the California Sun, and he curates good news, bad news, everything about California. These are things that you can get for free. Still support the Hanford Sentinel. Still support, we want to be part of those conversations. So those are all means of education. And if you know a young person who might be good at education, encourage them to go into education. We need good teachers. We need people who love all children, all young adults. It's powerful. It's been a wonderful profession. But I'm hoping to support in other ways, and I hope you do too. But most of all, thank you for coming today.
I will share my final thoughts by issuing an invitation and a hope. And I feel as I've been sitting here, with these amazing folks, and thank you to our hosts, and thank you to the high school, beautiful new high school. I also feel an imbalance because we've been doing all the talking. And as a teacher, I always feel uncomfortable when that happens. I'm like, ooh, somebody's checking out, right? But I also know that it's probably not going to be practical to hear from all of you today. So my invitation is this. Let this be an initial conversation, albeit a kind of one-sided one, of many more to come. I am in this position as director of the Kern Cahuilla chapter of the Sierra Club since only March 10th. And really I see tremendous potential, tremendous opportunity to connect people in nature and for folks to come together in ways that they haven't done for a very long time, if ever. And then my hope is that we will give each other grace as we continue to learn together, because if there's one thing that I've always appreciated about these wonderful folks that I've had the privilege to work with in all the many things that I've tried to do in my life, I didn't really know what I wanted to do with my life, and so I did a lot of different things. But there was one commonality. We earnestly wanted to do the right thing. I don't see a lot of folks who actually have decision-making authority demonstrating that desire. So it's up to us to do that. I don't know how, I don't know the specifics of it, whatever has spoke to you today, don't ignore that voice. take some sort of step towards something that perhaps has made you feel uncomfortable. If you heard something that made you feel uncomfortable, consider it consciously. Why is it making me feel uncomfortable? What can I do to learn more about that part of myself? Because if we're not asking ourselves the tough questions, how can we demand our leadership to ask themselves the tough questions? So that's my invitation to you and my hope. I'm around lori.casante@sierraclub.org, and feel free to sign up for our next event, which is on Zoom, so everybody should be able to join. We're hosting a tree dialogue, which is the second in our series about the healing power of trees and urban forest management in cities like Hanford, Bakersfield, Visalia, and Fresno.
Awesome. Well, thank you all. I want to start off by thank you all for being here, and I actually want to take a moment to recognize today is the 10th, which is traditionally celebrated as Mexican Mother's Day, and tomorrow is Mother's Day, so I want to take a round of applause for all of our mothers here in the room. And we all came from a woman, and most of us were raised by women who've taught us values. And I think now more than ever, it's important to protect our women as we think about reproductive justice, right? And not only the right to have an abortion, but the right to determine to have a child and to have the resources to raise a child in a world with a future, right? I'm reminded of many of my mom's teachings, in particular of Spanish dicho, where she would say, the saying goes, "Dime con quién andas y te digo quién eres," which roughly translated means, tell me who your friends are and I'll tell you who you are. And I think the same can be said for politics, and the same can be said for political donations. Tell me who's funding your campaign and I'll tell you who you're really working for. Tell me who you align yourselves and I'll tell you what you're prioritizing. And so that's why I've been very intentional about this campaign and being rooted in community, being rooted in working families, being rooted in the people that I love and care about. And so I want to encourage you all to keep that momentum moving forward. Today is the first of many events that will happen over the course of now and a year. It's going to be a long road ahead of us, but I know that you all have the strength, the commitment, and the love for your communities, as do everyone here on our panel today. And so I encourage you to remember that spark, to remember that fire, because when we think about the cuts to healthcare that are happening right now, we still have the opportunity to take action, and I encourage all of you to write, to call, to email Congressman Valadeo, to make sure that we're taking action to save Medicaid. If we can convince just 3 to 4 Republicans to grow a spine, we can save these programs. And that is something that is going to be life-saving, or that is going to cost us thousands of lives across this country. So I encourage us to take action, continue to organize, continue to believe, and to continue to fight for justice in our communities. We know that our healthcare system is broken. We know that we deserve better, but we know that we don't have to wait until 2026 to take action. We can take action today, just as all of you are doing right now. So I want to thank you all from the bottom of my heart. If you're interested in supporting us, you can head over to viegasforcongress.com or follow us on, Twitter, Blue Sky, Facebook, Instagram. Would greatly appreciate your support. I want to thank all the organizers of this event for having us, and I also want to thank all of you for being here today and for fighting for our communities. Thank you.
This wraps up our program, and this is a call to action. Basically, we all have something that we need to do. We all can make a difference. Whether it's protests, whether it's calls to your congressman's office, they're so tired of hearing from me. Register voters, make sure that young people understand the ballots and help them the first time they vote. We've got a table out there where you can get information on Democratic clubs in Tulare and Kings County. Dan's got his book, and Lori's got some information on the Sierra Club. We're going to go ahead and clear out, but please feel free to stay around for a while, talk. We just are so thankful that you came, and we hope to do many more things like this in the future. Thank you.